This is DGMT's Learning Lunch, and I'm your host, Rahima Esop. When we think about poverty, we often think about the material hardships, hunger, no indoor plumbing, social deprivation, unsafe or unhygienic living conditions, and the impact these things have on one's physical body. But what about the impact on one's inner world, one's mind? While the complexity of poverty is well reflected in research, the implications of poverty for individuals' inner experiences are less discussed. Chronic worry, low self-esteem, powerlessness, hopelessness, and loss of confidence form part of people's inner experiences. If someone feels unworthy, isolated, and unable to imagine a better future for themselves, they won't go to a skill center to learn a new craft or pursue a job that might give them a leg up in the working world. This is why understanding and responding to the inner dimensions of poverty matter in youth development. This is what we are talking about today with Simone Peinke, project lead of FETCH, an initiative incubated by DGMT. And we're joined by Anwar Parker, who is a psychologist for the Year Beyond program. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Simone, let's start with you. I want to talk about how poverty has generally been discussed in the youth development sector. What definition of poverty do you find useful as a starting point for this discussion?
So I think in the sector generally, we think of poverty in terms of the physical or material deprivations that young people experience, particularly in terms of monetary deprivation. So people think, you are poor as a result of a lack of income, a lack of access to money. But we know that the experience is far broader than that. We have to think about poverty beyond the monetary deprivations, but even beyond the material deprivations, and really start to understand and consider some of these hidden, these invisible aspects that are as significant and that pose as significant barriers to young people being able to connect to economic opportunities. I think the problem of understanding poverty in purely economic terms is that you end up looking for purely economic solutions, and we know that those are not sufficient.
So what are the different dimensions then of poverty that we are not thinking about, the hidden dimensions?
Yeah, so there was a report recently published by ATD Fourth World and the University of Oxford called The Hidden Dimensions of Poverty. They presented 9 different dimensions, 6 of which are new. So the 3 known dimensions of poverty refer to some of those material deprivations that we know about, so lack of access to services, healthcare, education. The 6 new deprivations, 3 of them refer to what they classify as these internal core experiences. The first being feelings of disempowerment, feeling like you have no control over your life because you are so dependent on other people, on other institutions for survival. The other is feelings of struggle and resistance, feeling like you constantly are having to fight to overcome just to get by. And the third, and one that we see often when working with young people, relates to the physical, mental, and emotional suffering. And so physically, there is suffering as a result of a lack of access to healthcare services, lack of access to preventative healthcare. And the emotional and mental suffering is largely a result of all the stress and anxiety that comes with living in contexts of chronic deprivation. The additional 3 dimensions that the report speaks to are classified as relational dimensions. So here, these to me are really fascinating because these are dimensions of poverty that people experience as a result of how they're treated by those of us not in poverty, which means that those of us who aren't experiencing poverty have an opportunity here to contribute to how other people are able to escape experiences of poverty. The relational dimensions include things like institutional and social maltreatment. So people not being respected, not being treated as valuable members of society because of, being in poverty. And the third dimension, which for me is really fascinating to unpack, is this idea of unrecognized contributions. So what is fascinating about this is it becomes internalized. So people in poverty are not recognized for the contributions they make to their families, to their communities. And we see, especially when working with young people, that they internalize this. When you ask a young person, what skills do you have? What do you spend your time doing? They'll often say nothing. And as soon as you dig a little deeper, you see they are caring for young children of family members, or they are even sometimes running their own pretty successful businesses, whether it's doing hair or selling food or a car wash, yet they don't themselves see this as valuable work. And in order to address poverty and to get young people to escape these poverty traps, we have to be addressing these unseen dimensions in addition to the material deprivations that young people are facing.
Thanks, Simone. Anwar, as Simone's described, the most visible dimension is lack of resources. And many civil society-led interventions are focused on addressing this by providing training, by providing resources and opportunities. But from your experience, do young people living in poverty, do they need more than just skills and income-earning opportunities to get ahead?
Thanks, Rema. And in answering that question, I'd like to echo what Simone said about the visible dimension of poverty being material lack. First of all, the lack of food, the lack of money, the lack of jobs, the lack of education, lack of opportunities. And it's quite natural that many of our interventions focus on providing those resources. And we know they're essential, and we know that young people can't thrive without them. But when we look at young people's lives and listen to their stories more closely, we see that poverty isn't just about the absence of those resources. It's also about, as Simone has mentioned, the psychological and social weight and relational weight that comes from living in context of deprivation. So, for instance, many young people living in poverty, they grow up with constant uncertainty, not knowing if they can afford transport for the next day, or if they'll come home to a home that has a calm environment, or maybe an abusive home. So that chronic uncertainty creates stress, and that stress really shapes the brain and body in real ways, and it makes it harder to focus, it makes it harder to take risks, and it also makes it harder to plan for the long term. And there's also that invisible message that society sends, that because you come from a poor community, your potential is somehow limited. And young people absorb this, and they may internalize shame or a sense of, I'm not good enough. And then even when opportunities do exist or good opportunities come up, they may feel a bit undeserving or incapable of reaching for those goals. And that's why I've heard of this term that many people are starting to use called a poverty of aspiration. It's not that young people don't dream, but rather that the structures around them shrink the horizon of what feels possible. So to your question, yes, skills and income earning opportunities are absolutely vital, but on their own, they are not enough. Young people also need to experience affirmation of their dignity. They also need to develop a sense of agency and to be surrounded by supportive relationships and role models that can show them that success is attainable for someone just like them. And they also need spaces to heal from trauma and to strengthen their resilience and build hope. And if we address the economic side only, we risk creating programs that are transactional, that transfer skills and that can transfer resources, but that they don't really transform lives. So when we attend to the hidden dimensions, these psychosocial and relational needs, then those same skills and opportunities become something that young people can really use to shift their life trajectory.
I think that's a very important term, a poverty of aspiration, because if young people can't imagine a better future for themselves, they won't actively pursue it. And hope in this conversation feels really important, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that hope is not just important, I think hope is foundational. And from a psychological perspective, hope is what allows us to connect today's efforts to tomorrow's possibility. If a young person cannot imagine that their circumstances could change, then even when opportunities do come their way, they may not take up those opportunities, or they might just give up after the very first obstacle or setback. So I also want to say that hope isn't the same as blind optimism. It isn't simply wishing things will get better, but I would rather just define hope as the belief that a better future is possible and that you have the power to move towards it. And it's that belief that energizes action. And let me tell you something, hope is quite contagious. When a young person sees someone from their own community succeed, or when they feel seen or believed in by another adult, it really lights a spark. And that spark can change the way they approach opportunities and how much effort they put into those opportunities, and also how they recover from failure.
As you were speaking, it reminded me of an opinion piece that one of my colleagues wrote in collaboration with one of our implementing partners, Siyavuna Development. That NGO found out that in doing its youth development work, working with young people in agriculture, the people that they were working with were despondent. They were coming from troubled environments, and sometimes they weren't showing up to the project. And so they realized that they needed to incorporate thinking about mental health and wellness into their project. It wasn't their core work, but they had to consider it. What advice can you then give to civil society organizations that are realizing this, that are actively seeing this in their projects? What advice can you give to them if dealing with mental health and mental wellness is not core to their project? How do they incorporate it?
Yeah, I think if it's not core to their project, I think they need to find ways to incorporate it, like through, I've seen this very interesting school, a high school in the middle of Wallerstein called Hector Peterson High School. And I'll never forget how that school used to incorporate hope into everything they did. School assemblies, they'd have motivational speakers. They'd start the school assembly by having a young person share something that gives them hope in their own lives, and constantly bringing alumni from that high school that's achieving something, even if it's just sharing the experience being at the university now, to young people. And when young people see other people succeed in communities that are just like theirs and who live in conditions just like them, that in itself is inspirational. So I think organizations can build in those kind of experiences where they get to listen to other young people that have experienced lives like they have and are achieving success, but also give them opportunities, small little opportunities, like opportunities to participate in a project outside of their own community, to mingle with young people outside of their own community, so that they can see that the world is bigger than what they see just in their own little hub and their own little community. And I think that's what builds hope as well.
I think that's really important. Another one of our implementing partners, Heroes Academy, works with high school boys in Cape Town's townships, and that's precisely what they do to instill hope and aspiration. They've introduced ambassadors, people who have done amazing things, who are men, because they work with boys in particular, so men who have done amazing things. That's like so important for the young boys to be able to dream about a life beyond the sort of like township environment that they grew up in. Simone, I want to talk a bit about FETCH, the intervention that FETCH uses to respond to the hidden dimensions of poverty.
Our model advocates for a scaffolded, holistic system of support for young people, because we know that even though there are these common trends or themes or ways in which poverty is experienced, it is experienced differently by different young people at different times in their lives, because we all have different contexts, right? Different experiences, different things that happen to us. And so we need these dynamic systems of support that young people can engage with as they need. We acknowledge that young people do at times need intensive support. And so for this, we have developed a kind of an approach and a methodology and tools and resources for what we call individualized multidimensional coaching. And this coaching is a way to work with a young person to start to build their agency, their hope, but also plan for what they want to see happen differently in their future. There is a report that's been released recently on multidimensional coaching that we found really helpful in framing this coaching approach. The report looks at organizations across the world implementing multidimensional coaching as a way to drive socioeconomic inclusion. And one of the kind of common threads in all these coaching approaches that makes it different from other poverty alleviation interventions is that the person experiencing poverty is in the driving seat. They are the person making the decisions about where they want to go and what they want to do. And that does so much to rebuild agency, and especially in young people, entering early adulthood, figuring out their sense of purpose and identity in the world. It's so important to give them that space to exercise agency and choice.
Simone, operationally, how does multidimensional coaching work? Is the person paired with a mentor? Does it happen in person? Does it happen telephonically?
So our coaching approach, this kind of intensive support, we recommend happens in person. And I think Beyond can speak to the experience of trying to do things digitally. We've had some experience there and have found that the digital coaching isn't as effective because of how many times they've been failed by systems. There is very low levels of trust in institutions, in NGOs. And so just building trust with a young person takes time and we believe needs to be done in person. We think that does a lot. So typically how we've implemented this multidimensional coaching approach is trained practitioners who have some kind of social services experience, not in every case, but mostly. We train them on how to provide this holistic coaching approach that is underpinned by the principles of building agency, building hope, and building confidence in the young person. The main focus of the coaching is to get young people to a point where they're able to action plan across multiple life areas. So they decide what life area they want to work on. We do include career development coaching because we know that is something that young people, especially at the life stage we're engaging with them in, are grappling with. And so we include that as part of our training. And we've found that for young people we've spoken to, most of them come in not having had anyone to speak to before. I mean, you were speaking about one of DGMT's implementing partners working with young boys, particularly young men that come to the coaching. They've never spoken, they've not had the opportunity to speak about the stresses, the emotional suffering that they're going through. And we can see how that plays out negatively for a lot of these young people, whether it's substance abuse or in other ways, because many of them don't even have a private space to talk about these kinds of issues. And so the relationship between the coach and the young person is really important.
Typically, Anwar, how long would the coaching journey last? I suspect it would be case by case, but typically how long?
Generally, the first session or two is really getting to build that safety, to really explore the issue with the young person. And then by the third session, you're well into helping them problem solve. Also going back and checking if you've implemented those strategies and what's worked, what hasn't, and then coming back and then maybe problem solving again and supporting them. So I would say about 4 to 6 sessions maximum. And sometimes something can be resolved in just 1 or just 2. sometimes some young people just need someone to listen to them and vent, but they already have their own solutions lined up.
I think just to add as well, if I can, to the idea of individualized coaching and how many sessions are required, I think it's such a great question and such an important point, because when we talk about the need for individualized support, a lot of people kind of balk at the idea because they assume it's super expensive to provide. But young people don't need this type of intensive support ongoing. It's for a short period of time, but when they need it, they do need it. And the effect of not providing it at that time only serves to compound these problems later. Something that we're really trying to dispel is the idea of this being really expensive and unnecessary, and there are shortcuts to providing this kind of support. We found that those shortcuts aren't as effective. So in terms of how multidimensional coaching fits into the FETCH model, in terms of providing the scaffolded support, so those who need that intensive support, there's this individualized multidimensional coaching. For those who need less intensive support, we advocate for kind of peer groups, like support groups, which Year Beyond do as well. I think especially for this age group, peer connections and relationships are so important. So to create spaces where they can really come together and support one another is essential. For those who need even less intensive support, so perhaps they need access to resources or a little bit of information, that's where digital can be really powerful. But again, young people don't move linearly through these different tiers. It's a very dynamic thing depending on what's coming up in their lives, and they need to be able to be referred between all these different tiers of support. The key thing I think that we advocate for with this tiered support model is that it needs to sit in a network of really supportive local services. Because of the multidimensional nature of poverty, young people need to be able to access different types of services. But because of how young people are treated often by these services, they feel like they don't have access to that support. And so until we can get that right, again, these other interventions make a difference, but they can't really ever realize the full change they could unless they're working in collaboration and synergy with local services who are also supporting young people in the way they need to be supported.
And is FETCH in any way involved in that, in ensuring that municipalities are providing services that young people need, whether it be healthcare or social services or just access to basic services?
Yeah, so in terms of community level interventions, top-down approaches we found, and I think many people in the sector would agree, don't work. It needs to be community driven. And so the community level intervention that we've been working on is really focused on engaging local service providers on issues facing young people. So getting young people in the room, talking to service providers about how they are experiencing issues of poverty in their community as a result of how they're being treated.
How does the FETCH model play out operationally?
Yeah, so we work with other organizations. There are a lot of incredible organizations, Year Beyond being very well known and an incredible one that's been doing this work for many, many years. Our hope, our intention is to not duplicate work that is already happening. I think where we were particularly fortunate is we had quite a number of years to develop these tools and test them. And so we are now in a position where we are wanting to offer those tools and processes and approaches to organizations where they think it can strengthen their work. So we really are hoping to strengthen what exists instead of replacing anything or doing anything radically different. For example, there are lots of organizations already doing kind of community convening. And so it's, not that the way we have come to do it is the right way. But for those organizations who don't do that currently or feel like they maybe could be doing it better, we look those are the kinds of organizations that we hope to support. So in working with implementing partners, our kind of offering is training on on how to use these tools and processes. We really also try to align and integrate them with what the organizations are already doing, and then ongoing quality assurance. I think we've seen that, that's oftentimes it's not the design and the solution that's the problem, it's how it's implemented. And so our approach to quality assurance is very much, it's a developmental approach. It's acknowledging that those people doing the work at the coalface are often themselves going through a lot. And so it's about supporting them in a way that enables quality work.
Anwar, how has FETCH supported your program Year Beyond?
Well, FETCH has been a very valuable partner to Year Beyond precisely because they help us respond to those hidden dimensions of poverty that we've been talking about. Our program already provides young people with training, opportunities and pathways into further study or work. And we recognized early on that many of the youth in our programs, we call them Yebeneers, our Yebeneers also carry heavy emotional burdens, from trauma in their communities to stress in navigating uncertainty to self-doubt that comes with growing up in poverty. And for the past few years, we have had an ecosystem of support for our Yebeneers that consists of crisis counseling support, referral service, well-being courses, group support and debriefing. So this year we strengthened our ability to support our young people holistically by piloting a well-being coach program in 3 pilot areas in the Western Cape, Bonneville and Swellendam, in George, and then in Paarl, specifically in Bokweni. And we trained a small team of well-being coaches in psychosocial first aid, in trauma debriefing, and in group support. And then the FETCH team also trained them in the coaching model, which I think is so ideal for addressing and containing these hidden dimensions of poverty. And the FETCH team also helped us to set up referral pathways so that those with more serious mental health needs don't fall through the cracks but can get connected to help within their local communities. So we were able to develop a comprehensive asset map of local resources for each of the pilot communities.
Anwar, staying with you, what lessons have you learned from doing this work that are relevant to civil society organizations?
So one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that poverty is not just about money and skills. If we focus on that visible dimension, the lack of resources, then we miss that the deeper drivers that keep our young people stuck. Civil society has a very unique role to play in recognizing and addressing those hidden dimensions, because often civil society is closer to communities and more flexible than government, and also able to innovate in ways that really matter to people's daily lives. And I think another lesson is that relationships are as powerful as resources. So young people, they don't just need programs, they also need people. They need mentors, they need peers, they need facilitators, people who believe in them, who walk alongside them, and that, people that affirm their worth. And I think that civil society organizations are at their best when they create those ecosystems of support for young people, where young people can feel safe, can feel seen, and can be hopeful. And then another lesson that I've learned relates to what I was talking about earlier about hope. I think that hope is a strategy, and that's one of the things I've learned, that hope is a strategy. It can be easy to think about hope as something soft compared to job creation or training, but the truth is that without hope, those interventions don't land. Civil society must intentionally nurture hope, and they can do that through storytelling, through role modeling, through exposure to opportunities, and also by celebrating small wins, because hope is what fuels that persistence and resilience in our youth. And then I think a final lesson that I've learned is that the importance of integration. That too often we work in silos. One program does training, another one does counseling, another one does mentorship. But the real impact comes when we can weave these together into a holistic approach. and civil society has to collaborate more, not just to compete for resources, but actually collaborate, especially if we're serious about breaking the cycles of poverty.
How do we get policymakers to take notice of these hidden dimensions, to understand that it is relevant, that if we want to address youth unemployment, it's not only about creating jobs and linking to opportunities, it's about this other layer that, as we've spoken about throughout this podcast, are hidden?
We urgently need to start demonstrating how these hidden dimensions show up in our work. Having worked in the space for a while now, I know that so many practitioners have got many stories of how these hidden dimensions are impacting on the young people we work with. I do think and have seen that it is difficult to shed light on these when we're speaking to funders and policymakers. It's difficult sometimes to put the participants of your program to show instances where, despite all this investment and despite all this training and all this good work you're doing, they're still not able to get themselves out of the situation they're in. And that is sometimes difficult. And so I appreciate that challenge. But I think as a collective, we need to move away from that. We need to tell the stories of the young people we've been working with for so long, who still don't show up to the interview, who still arrive inebriated at work, who still are too scared to take up the opportunity that's in front of them because of these other dimensions, and because we aren't able to provide additional support because there isn't oftentimes funding for that. So I think firstly, just demonstrating how these things are showing up. And then I think coming up with ways to measure these things. So finding consistent indicators that we can use across programs to show, firstly, the extent to which these things are sitting with young people, and then also to see how are we able to shift these through different types of interventions. Until we start measuring these things and demonstrating the impact that they have on employability and ability to connect to any kind of opportunity, people won't see the importance or the relevance of addressing these issues. And it does feel particularly urgent now when there is so much attention on youth unemployment. And we've seen over the last 2 years, the needle hasn't shifted, it's gotten worse. We have to start thinking differently about how we're approaching this problem, and we have to start investing differently. To Anwar's points, which he's consistently made so well, it's not to say that the material aspects don't matter. We have to continue to address those, but we need to do that in addition to addressing these hidden dimensions that are often working against young people in such significant ways that really do continue to hold them back.
Final question and final word from you, Simone. What succinct message do you have for politicians who stand up in Parliament and say things like, we can deal with youth unemployment, we just need to create more jobs?
We have worked with partners where there have been 100 learnership opportunities on a platter, and they could not fill 10. That is the reality that we're sitting with, and that's the reality that practitioners see all the time. And so you can do all of the job creation you want. If we aren't supporting young people holistically, they're not going to be able to take those jobs up. They're not going to be able to stay in those jobs, and they aren't going to be able to use those jobs as the meaningful stepping stone out of poverty.
And these are the young people who are most vulnerable, the ones who are currently not in education, not in employment, or in any training opportunity. Young people, we know, need more than just information and resources. They need to be actively engaged in how to access and utilize a care network that centers their needs, builds their agency, confidence, and above all, hope. And now, over to you, those listening to this podcast. Using what you have heard today, you can try this reflective exercise. You'll need a pen and paper to write down these steps, or download the takeaway sheet from our website, dgmt.co.za, and go to the podcast tab. Write down the following questions and spend some time reflecting on them by yourself, and then share your reflections with your colleagues. Question number 1. How have you seen these hidden dimensions of poverty manifest in your work or in your community or where you live? Question number 2. What can you start doing differently to support young people to better navigate the invisible effects of poverty? And question number 3. How can you be an ally in championing for more holistic, wraparound support for young people living in poverty? This is DGMT's Learning Lunch. Until next time.